Hi, everybody, and welcome back to yet another cracking installment of the Map Round Show. This is the Secrets of Scale series where we're talking to CEOs and founders and entrepreneurs who've actually built businesses to scale. So with us in the hot seat today is none other than the CEO of Acumatica, John Case. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to meet you.
No, fantastic. Yes, so you guys have got an incredible story, so stoked to have you here. Why don't you kick us off with the elevator pitch though, John? What are you guys up to at Acumatica? Who are your customers typically, problems that you solve, all that kind of stuff?
Good. Yeah, great. Yeah, so we're Acumatica. We're a born in the cloud ERP software. And what does that actually mean? ERP means enterprise resource planning. What it really means is sort of day-to-day business management software. So we sell a cloud set of software to small, medium businesses who are trying to scale or trying to grow, and we automate their daily operations, their accounting, their project management, their CRM, inventory, supply chain, all those kinds of things. So companies that really maybe don't have access to all the most modern technology from the biggest players like SAP, they look at Acumatica and think they can really modernize their operations with us. And that's been a very successful growth path for us for over a decade.
Mm-hmm. How big are you guys at the moment, just to paint a picture of the kind of scale that you guys have reached so far?
Yeah, we have more than 10,000 customers. We're very heavily focused on North America. We're growing. We think we're the fastest growing kind of software company in our space. We're between 600 and 700 employees. Again, predominantly North America. We have some international operations as well, and we're growing. Very very high. Double digits, sort of every year, every quarter. This is an exciting week for us because it's the end of our quarter, so I get to watch hundreds of new customers kind of join the Acumatica family, like today and tomorrow. It's a fun time to be watching the email notices as they come through.
Yeah, I'm sure. I call those champagne problems.
Yeah, great.
So,
bell ring.
Yeah, exactly. So what do you attribute your growth to? I mean, I know there's a number of things that define this, but if you were to, I know you've come in as CEO quite recently, but if you could, why is it that Acumatica is scaling so rapidly, 10,000 customers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? What do you put that down to?
No, I think it's a combination of factors. I think the founders, again, some of whom are still involved with the company, built a really good cloud platform when that was not something that was happening in our technology space. We are a cloud native ERP. We're moving customers away from sort of old school legacy software, which we can talk about if you're interested in that. And I think that that's a very attractive story. And then we sort of said, how do we go to market? And we very much picked a unique go-to-market motion, which is through our partner channel. We are 100% partner. We have hundreds of transacting partners that work with us, again, mostly in North America, but also around the world. And they are the ones that engage with the customer, do implementation and do customization, and benefit from sort of the recurring revenue model around Acumatica. So you have this, I would say it's an old and fairly static ecosystem. And suddenly we came in and started shaking things up. And the whole market, I think, has kind of moved in our direction. And we think we have a great and terrific product that we continue to innovate on. We're very good at vertical solutions. We focus on a couple of very key specific industries like construction, manufacturing, distribution, logistics, supply chain, retail commerce. And so we have a lot of unique tools we built vertically for those specific industries. And that gives us also a big definable advantage.
Yeah. There was there is a lot of talk at the moment, like especially in the context of Microsoft, that Azure revenue is kind of slowing down. It's probably a reason why they put, $10 billion into OpenAI, because it's offsetting that Azure revenue. And I would even go so far as to say that $10 billion is like, here's a bunch of Azure credits, OpenAI, that you can use to scale your infrastructure. And then, obviously Microsoft was my client in a previous life when COVID hit, and they ran out of data center space and a whole bunch of digital transformation budgets moved forward and so forth and what have you. So do you see, how do you see this cloud consumption space moving, and what do you feel will be driving, consumption moving forward?
Oh, it's a really interesting question. I think, first of all, there's all kinds of vertical applications, again, like Acumatica, like ERP. They're just beginning to hit saturation on the cloud. So I don't think that we've hit any kind of saturation point in some of these sort of day-to-day industries. I think enterprises have gone that way very heavily, but I think like in our target market, sort of 50 to 500 employee companies, they're just beginning to see the benefits of cloud across a range of technology stacks. So, for us, I think, we look at like what's happening in the macroeconomic environment and, news you see from some of these big companies that are cutting back or doing layoffs. That's not what our customer segment feels at all. They still see, rapid employment, tons of investment. They still see a very strong path forward on cloud consumption over the next 5 to 10 years. And that's what we're here trying to kind of help them through.
Mm-hmm. How much funding have you guys raised to date?
Yeah, we did. Right now we're fully owned by a private equity firm called EQT Partners, which is one of the 3 largest private equity firms in the world. They're based in Sweden and mostly in Europe. Before that, the company had raised a couple different funding rounds. I think there were 3 specific funding rounds. That raised to the order of like $50 million. But again, all that got erased when EQT came in and bought the firm. I think the last round was in 2017, led by Excel KKR. But before that, they'd taken on investment from some international partners like MYOB from Australia, New Zealand, and Visma from Sweden. But again, all that's no longer part of our kind of ownership tree because private equity came and bought us out in 2019.
Mm-hmm. And this role of the indirect sales channel, how important, I suppose it's a rhetorical question. I was going to say, like, how important is it? I mean, all these big OEM vendors, Microsoft, Oracle, SAP, all these guys, they have this indirect sales channel. Over and above that, I mean, how do you see your next evolution of scale coming about? What would you say is driving this next level of scale? Because you guys are a very mature company. So I'm curious to get your view on, like, when you reach a certain level of maturity, it's like, well, where do we go from here?
I think you got to look both at the history of that channel and then also how it's evolving. And so I'll do that for a minute if that makes sense to you. But, I think we originally kind of the growth thesis here was to bring in some of these ecosystem channel partners, which don't tend to be very large companies, tend to be also small, medium businesses like us when we were starting, and bring them in and say, help us move the customers that you've had for many years on, a Sage or a Microsoft Great Plains or these old school legacy systems. And the thesis was to bring them in, get them involved in Acumatica, and they could see kind of what it means to be in the SaaS space for the first time and move those customers over time to a SaaS product like Acumatica, and then they can benefit from that in their business. I think that core is still there. I think what we've also learned, though, is that as we had to go vertically into specific industries, we had to sign up different partners with different skills who knew how to do different things. Like the construction space is so radically different from, say, manufacturing. And the skills and the customer examples and the references are also radically different. And you have to do that at scale. And that's the point of this discussion. I think for us, I look at our ability to add more industries is a huge point in our scale growth, but also our ability to take some of these existing partners and help them grow. We're not working with, the largest systems integrators in the world. We're working with other medium-sized companies that specialize in a unique thing. They know how to do e-commerce and retail well, but they know how to do distribution well or construction well. And we're adding to that pool of partners all the time. So for us, we still think that the partner channel is our growth model. I think it's not normal in our space. And most of the companies we compete with have a strong direct motion where they have their own sales team and they rely on partners for things like implementation. We like the partners being our scale engine. We want to add to our partner group. We want them to grow. Again, they all represent tens of thousands of companies that have bought legacy systems. And for us, the better we treat those partners, the more likely they'll want to move their legacy customers over to the Acumatica platform. And that's the bet we're making and the bet they're making. Mm-hmm. So, scale for us it can't come from hiring thousands of people ourselves. We can only get it from the thousands of salespeople and consultants and implementation specialists and developers that our partners bring to the table. And that's why we're happy that that's still our growth model. Mm-hmm. And, I think that's one that we will always assess and we'll look at, maybe as we go up market or maybe as we go international, what does it mean for the partner channel? But we are really committed to that partner growth being the source of our scale because we just really wouldn't be able to replicate that by hiring staff ourselves.
Got it. So for our founders out there who are curious about when do you use an indirect sales channel, because it seems like all these mature companies have done it, and we recognize why. It's more like the cost of acquisition is lower, the cost of maintaining and servicing your portfolio. It's really, as an OEM or a vendor, you're enabling your reseller base or your partners to manage that relationship. So it's kind of like sell once, here's 1,000 partners, you get 10x the return. So So that's the strategy, but I'm curious to get your view, John. When does a CEO decide to go that route as opposed to doing the direct acquisition model?
It's a very good question. And even in my last company, we faced this interesting decision point. I think first of all, you got to look at the customer segment you're selling to. If you're selling to enterprises, you can put a direct salesperson, in the door of that customer and have a direct conversation because there aren't that many customer targets. When you're selling to small, medium businesses, and we might have, 10 million potential targets in the United States alone, for example, how do you possibly scale with an unknown company with a brand that isn't fully, kind of aware of the, people don't know who we are, didn't know who we are 10 years ago. And so the partner channel for us was the scale motion. They got us customer access and it gave us references. They gave us a way of saying, we know the construction space or we know the distribution space because we have a partner or partners that are uniquely good at it. But really the big point for me is, do you have access to that customer? Are they going to find you without that indirect channel? And can you run that profitably? And the indirect channel for us is therefore an access point to customers who wouldn't see. It's a brand reference because the customer knows the partner better than they know us, at least initially. And then it allows us to say we have these unique specialized skills. But more importantly, we wouldn't be able to do the same margins, the same profit levels that we can get today indirect in a direct business. And for us, I think that will continue to be the motion. I think as we go internationally, we launched in the UK a couple of years ago, and we have a small but fast growing business, for example, in Latin America. We're making those same choices. We're looking at customer access, brand awareness, cost of acquisition, and making that trade-off. And that's what we'll continue to look at. And I think any CEO would have to think about that calculus as they think about that decision.
Absolutely. John, when you look at other markets, because obviously you guys are on this, scale trajectory, I don't think that you can have enough scale, especially if you're owned by, majority owned by a PE firm. It's like, how big can you get? Right. And so when you're looking at, other developing markets, say like South Africa or Middle East or whatever the case might be, how do you approach expansion or scale entering a new market when you have product market fit and all this kind of stuff and proof and scale in developed markets? How do you decide strategically on where to scale next when you look at other geographies?
I mean, you do have to, you said product market fit is where you have to start. You have to decide, could your product actually work in, that country? I think that in different software markets, you get different answers. In ERP, because we're dealing with accounting rules, we're dealing with regulation, and we're dealing with payroll, there is a lot of unique customization for that country. And so when we launched in the UK, we had to decide where we're going to put the investment in and time and energy with engineers, with developers to write that code. And we chose to do it. But then we sort of said, okay, what's the status of that market? How, what's going on with competition? What's happening with the indirect market there, the partner channel? Is there opportunity? And there are countries like, for example, Germany, where we have a business through a third party, an OEM called Halco, and we look at Germany and the fundamental competitive dynamics for our technology are fantastic. But it took many, many years to build a product that fit for that market. And we probably wouldn't have made that investment ourselves, but we chose to do it with a third party because they had strong interest and strong brand recognition and strong ability to reach customers locally. And so that's always the math we go through. We say, do we have product market fit? Are we fully localized? Can we actually customize what we need to do for that country? And then what's the competitive dynamic? Is there a place for us? And then are there channel partners that we think would be the most attractive way to enter that market? And I think that's we have, for example, a small business in South Africa and a small business in Southeast Asia where we have local partners who are helping us drive growth. But I would say, over time, we'll fully commit to those and we'll build out big teams and we'll add to our time and energy there. But today we're using it as sort of training grounds. We're learning how to do those motions because it is unique and you can't just decide that you're in a new country overnight and hope it works. You have to take those steps and understand what does it really take to be competitive and not just sign a customer, but satisfy them, keep them happy for years and years and years. ERP is not a decision customers make for 1 year. They're going to bet on this for 10 or 20 years. So it's not a light decision to go to a place like the UK, sign up a customer and hope that they stay with you. You have to be willing to make those investments over time as well.
So John, what have you guys built platform and or product wise? You mentioned cloud ERP, accounting rules and things like that, but walk our audience through what have you actually built technology-wise?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, again, ERP is a fairly known category. It's not like we're inventing accounting, or it's not like we're inventing payroll. But what it is are the core business management problems that any business has. And we particularly gear our software towards this small, medium set of companies that say have anywhere from say 10 to 1,000 employees, or 10 to $200 million of revenue. And so they have unique needs. And we built effectively a software platform that takes all of their business management needs and puts it on the cloud, puts it in a browser form with an easy to see UI. Underneath that, we run the whole thing on AWS primarily, but also some Azure. So we run it in sort of a multi-tenant public cloud. We built an extensibility platform that allows those customers and our partners to bring in third-party ISVs to hook into effectively our data. So they want to share data with sort of other well-known construction tools, or other well-known payroll tools, or other CRM tools. Our data has to be both exposed to those and then consume the data that they provide. So we're not just a software tool, we're also a platform for others to hook into, because really I look at ERP kind of as a hub and spoke. The core accounting, the core business management is the hub, and there's all kinds of ways you want other software to spoke into that or connect into that. And so the platform extensibility was as important in some ways as the core functionality. That technology is, we release it twice a year, again through the web, through the cloud, and our customers are constantly seeing these kind of recurring product updates as we innovate. And so for them, unlike what they had to do before, where they had to go and someone had to go physically touch a server, physically touch, how it was happening in their UI, it can happen for them natively in the cloud itself, that we can actually own that process to some extent for them. And so that's the benefit of the cloud for ERP versus, and really for any cloud stack versus a legacy on-premises system. But that's what we built, is the core business management and then recently, the last 4 or 5 years, we've added these vertical applications. So if you're in construction and you want specific tools for maybe how you do cost estimation, or how you do construction payroll, or field services management, because workforce is a big deal, we built all these very specific vertical tools that connect to that core accounting base. And that's what ERP is, and that's what our vertical additions do.
So AI.
Yeah.
It'd be remiss of me not to ask you, how do you see the role of artificial intelligence now that it's a real thing and not lip service like it was for a long time, playing a role in your evolution of scale? So for instance, just for reference there, obviously, I touched on this earlier, but Microsoft integrate, well, basically it's everyone. It's Google, it's Microsoft. Like basically if you're an OEM like you guys are, it's kind of like, it's not a nice to, you must have it. So how are you seeing the role of artificial intelligence creating a competitive advantage at a mature stage company like you guys are? And how do you see it like driving new opportunities, given the fact that you guys are at such a huge scale already?
I see it. I really see this happening in kind of 3 specific ways, and this is all debatable, and there's speculation, but I see 3 specific things happening. One, it's going to allow us to make the product much more efficient, right? I actually think that as people use AI and all kinds of kind of machine learning algorithms better, the product will get better at simplifying itself, being more efficient, knowing how to do implementations on its own. Like there'll be less human touch in the actual product, which I think will be really innovative for the average customer over time, because there's still a lot of effort that needs to go in and manually update process, or manually update, an invoice or whatever. I actually think that AI can solve some of those manual touch problems. So that's the first thing I'd say. Second thing I'd say is it's going to allow us to train and educate and find specific ways for users to learn in a much more efficient way. We see this already today. We run a big sort of training system around the Acumatica product. We're innovating all kinds of ways that will allow users, partners, third parties, ISVs to actually learn more and make decisions better about how to implement Acumatica. So it's going to teach people a lot more efficiently. And then the third part for me is, because we have that many customers, we run a large-scale support system and a large-scale services system where we have to do, we're handling escalations and all kinds of things that any product like ours would have to handle. AI is making us much more efficient in that regard. It's allowing the product to find, the bug before we have to go manually search for it, or find the error in the customer's code before we have to go manually search for it. And I think that's going to make us much faster and allow us to innovate much more rapidly. And so I think that, I look at those as sort of short-term to near-term opportunities. I think everything around AI, everything around ChatGPT, and everything it's teaching people how to learn better. Those are teaching us how to write code better. And so, I think in 5 years, we'll look back on this moment, we'll say, wow, the product got a lot more efficient, the platform got a lot more efficient in that 5 years. But in the meantime, there's all these other customer benefits like support, like education that are real and they're today. And I think we're very excited about that.
John, we're going to take a quick break and we'll hear from one of our sponsors. We'll be back in a moment.
The Matt Brown Show is presented by Carafin, an investment bank that offers and supports direct private investments in U.S. operating companies. Over the past 20 years, investors have placed over $1.2 billion of private debt and equity in more than 100 companies through Carafin and its affiliates. Carafin leverages technology to empower its community of investors to deploy their capital far more efficiently than ever before and connects their community of engaged investors with worthy companies. Invest portions of your portfolio in direct private investments today. Visit carafin.com/Matt Brown Show for more.
John, curious to know, like it's amazing, right? All the success. You come in as CEO, you're on this. You got capital behind you. You got an amazing team, amazing business, product, etc. And it's all about scale. What are you struggling with right now? Like when you're staring at the ceiling, going, "I can't sleep tonight." What is that thing? What's the reason for that?
Well, I'll give you a couple. I'm very focused on our weaknesses more than our strengths because that's my job, right? But I think that, first of all, there's the macroeconomic environment, which is really interesting right now. There's all this. If you look at the press, if you look at popular opinion, it's like, is there a recession coming? Is there uncertainty? Banking crisis doesn't help, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that our customers feel that they're thinking about how to spend their dollars most efficiently over the next 2, 3, 4 years. And so right now, we haven't seen any impact from it. In fact, if anything, we've been helped by all this discussion around the macroeconomic environment. But that's what we're watching. I think that keeps me up at night to some extent. No matter, you might make great decisions and you might build a really super efficient company, but sometimes your growth path gets interrupted by events that you can't control. And that's a thing, and it happened with COVID a few years ago when that started. And I think it's happened recently with this. So that's one thing that keeps me up at night. The second thing I worry about or I stress about is choosing the right scale models, right? We have all kinds of options in front of us and we want to invest in the right ones, and how you make decisions based on ROI of what those models might be. Maybe we should go buy 2 other companies and combine them with Acumatica and build a bigger product. Maybe we should hire another 100 engineers and build a new tool. Like those are all optionalities that we have. Making that decision really is something that you have to take very, very seriously, and knowing when is the time to go launch in another country, or when is the time to go partner with a new third party that maybe could bring you scale. And I think that we look at all these optionalities and we have to think about what are the ones that could be most efficient for our growth path, for our story, for where we're headed on our journey. And I think that's the biggest challenge of any CEO when you get to, the scale that we're at, is how to double it and triple it again. And that's what they're asking. That's what the owners ask you to do. They think about, it's great you built this great company, but how do you double that? And how do you double that again? And are your processes and is your company built for that? Because in many cases, most companies are not. What worked to get a company from say $0 to $50 million is completely unlike what the company will be like when it's got a $500 million of revenue. And so that path, looking at where you're headed, knowing not just how to get that growth, but how your company needs to evolve, how your processes, your people, your systems all need to evolve to accommodate that growth most efficiently. That's the stuff that I worry about.
Yeah, it's such an important point. I found that scale is not, scale it was almost like a double-edged sword. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, yes, it's nice to always say that, you're doubling revenue and, you added another 1,000 people to your headcount, but that also puts you in a space and can put you in a space where it actually impacts your ability to lead and to be the right CEO for that type of scale at that time. Does that make sense?
No question. There's no question. And you're reinventing your company all the time, right? Like, because today, maybe you're this size, but you're going to double, then you're going to double again. Your company will not look the same in 4 years. And so how do you plan for that? And planning for that sometimes means hurting the company in the short term to build a better company for the long term. And those are tough decisions when you're on a growth path that's successful. It's tough to decide to cannibalize what you're currently doing to set yourself up for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. What has been, if you think back over the last year, say, what has been a really difficult choice that you've had to make? Like where you kind of felt like, well, like you mentioned, like you're focusing on the weaknesses as much as you are the strengths.
Sure.
What has been a really difficult choice that you've had to make in the context of scale, and what did you learn from it?
Well, I'll touch on a couple that you might find interesting, and there gets into some pretty specific stuff, but I'll do it. I think one of the choices we had to make is how aggressively we pursue international markets versus the domestic market. And domestic, I include Canada, because we run that as kind of one business. What we've actually realized, we actually made a choice, which was that while these international markets are appealing long-term, we have so much room for growth in the short term in North America that we chose to double down locally rather than double down internationally. And that was a very specific decision that we made that I believe has had impact on our engineering team, our sales team. We're not cutting anybody. We're not pulling back from any markets. We've just decided that for now, we see so much more growth opportunity in our current space, in our current primary geographies, that's where we're going to spend a huge percentage of our energy. So that's a choice we've made that we're very happy with. I'll give you a second one, which is, we actually had a big development team in Russia. And, when the conflict, when Russia invaded the Ukraine, that was a very difficult thing for us to decide what to do. And we've had to make a change there over time, which effectively to minimize our investment there and move most of those people out, or frankly, hire elsewhere. And so our geographic footprint shifted massively. And it's all happened in the last 8 to 10 months. And that was a very difficult choice because you're having to sort of really shake up and abandon a big chunk of the team that had built the product you currently have, but you knew that wasn't going to work for the future. And so we had to make that call and move that team at the same time. Those are two examples I would give you.
Thanks, John. And tell me, as a leader, what would you say is the most important quality for a CEO to have in the context of scale?
Yeah, I think single most important quality. I think you have to know what you're good at, and you have to hire around you with people that can do what you can't do. And one of the things I look at when I look at my team, my leadership team, that's the most important leverage point you have, is hiring the right leaders, and where can they bring scale and knowledge and skill that you don't have. And you have to be humble about that as a CEO. Like CEOs come in and they think they know things, and sometimes they do. I know what I'm good at, and I know what I'm not as good at, and where I really need to have the right person or persons running that team. And so you have to be very honest with yourself about that. I'm a big believer that I look at my team kind of in a portfolio way. I know which parts of the team are functioning very well, and which parts need an overfocus from me or an overfocus from an investment of some kind. And that all comes from knowing your own skill set and knowing what you can uniquely do to drive value and scale versus what you want to rely on someone else to give you. And I think that's the most, when I assess a new company, this is my second stint as a CEO, both went through an aggressive growth phase. That's the most important thing I've learned, is that I got to know what's happening in my team and who do I bet on with my own time, and who do I don't need to bet on with my own time, if that makes any sense, my own skills.
John, speaking of your own skills, what would you say this journey that you've been on with Acumatica has taught you about yourself? Is there something that you've learned about yourself, about scaling companies? You mentioned it's your second time as a CEO. Is there something that comes to mind around this journey that you've been on with Acumatica? What has it taught you about leadership?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think some of the things, like when I came here, you come with your set of management philosophies, and you come with the things that you believe, and you kind of have a sense for how you run a company. This was at a much larger scale than I've done before. So coming in here and thinking about the size of this company and the growth aspirations that it has, I had to be much more thoughtful about the future. I needed to be much less thoughtful about solving today's problems, and much more, and there are always some to solve. As a CEO, you always have issues on your table that you have to solve today. This person, that location, this customer, that partner, whatever it is. But I had to be much more planful and thoughtful about where we're headed and how to pick growth targets, not numbers, but what kind of company you wanted to be in 3 or 4 years, and set those targets very clearly and move that direction. And I think I think that when you enter a company, you're trying to learn it for the first time, or when you take over a new division or a new product or whatever it is, you learn it for the first time. It's very easy to get caught in the day-to-day. And you really have to make sure you're spending the appropriate amount of time and energy on the future, where you want to be. And I think that's a common trap that people fall into. And I always have to relearn that mistake. It's a mistake I make all the time, like, I gotta fix that again. And I think you're always inspecting yourself in that regard. But that's one of the things that I believe very strongly Acumatica keeps teaching me on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's an interesting point that you touch on. Like, I can just imagine like coming in as the CEO, right? Like, massive company, big, hungry, ambitions for growth, complicated business, lots of moving parts, not a simple thing to like, even if you joined a company like Acumatica, you're only productive after like 8 weeks, because you're still just figuring out the acronyms. Like, Microsoft has like a dictionary of 2,000 acronyms. You're like, what the hell is going on here? So when you come into an environment like that, like Acumatica's, John, how do you decide where to start as a CEO, recognizing that you're at a measure of scale already? You now have this extra level of scale, this hunger for growth. How do you decide where to start? Because I guess the insight here for me is, a CEO such as yourself, you're not paid to make 1,000 decisions. You're paid to make a handful of really good ones. And so in that context, how do you decide what to decide or make decisions on?
That's a really good question. I have a way I do that, and I did that when I was at Microsoft and like taking on a new team, or I began my second stint as CEO. I think about it like in sort of these 30, 60, 120-day plans. I kind of build a schedule for myself. And I actually think that the place you have to start immediately is with your own people, your own team. You want to get to know them as fast as possible and understand what they're good at, what the culture's like, how people feel, because you don't know those things. You're told something by your boss or your owner, and I always find that what they tell you is about 1/3 right and 1/3 wrong, and 1/3 they have no idea, and that's normal, right? And I think that's true of any new job you take, or the boss doesn't really know what the real story is. You have to build the real story for yourself. So the people is where I always start, and the second place I go immediately after that, if not at the same time, is with customers. And so I immediately started and did a customer tour and visited dozens of customers, and in this case also our partners, which is part of our customer journey. I had to build up a base of knowledge in how the business was operating, in what the partners' aspirations were, in how customers perceived us, in how our employees were performing, and not because I was trying to make a decision on any one person or any one function, because I needed to build a base of understanding, a foundation, so that I could then think about the future. I mean, I came in with a bunch of ideas. Typically, those ideas, as I said, were somewhat wrong. And you learn, if you don't build up credibility in the company, in the people, in the space, in the product. I don't consider myself an ERP expert, right? Like I didn't come from that part of the industry. I didn't have deep history working at other ERP companies. That wasn't my skill set. I'm coming in as a professional CEO. So I have to learn enough about the product, but really understand the business motion, really understand the people and how customers want to perceive us. That's where you have to start. And any person that comes in and doesn't do that work, you're making decisions based on not nearly enough personal context and knowledge and history. And so I don't want to go and make all the same decisions my predecessor made either, right? I don't want to just learn what everyone was doing and saying, check, it's fine. I want my own opinions, but the way to do that is by going to the source, not just talking to the head of sales, but talking to the individual salespeople, understanding what their day-to-day problems are. Not just talking to the head of a partner, but talking to the 10 people at that partner who are off closing business or doing implementations. Talking to, again, dozens of customers who can teach me so much about what they perceive us to be and what they need. And so that's the first place you go. I build these sort of plans based on timing, where I'm trying to understand, okay, how do I consume as much knowledge as possible so that I can then prioritize that and help my own team make those handful of key decisions. I like what you said. It's not, of course you're involved in lots of decisions, but it's only a handful of decisions that actually shape the future of the company. And you can't do that cold. You can't do that without, having built your own knowledge and perception and understanding.
Yeah, it's a great point. I want to quickly talk to you about, you mentioned people, so let's stay here for a minute. So when you think about scaling culture, what does that mean to you, and what mechanisms do you or do you recommend other CEOs use when it comes to scaling culture? And again, the specific context here is distributed workforces, right? So people working from home, some in the office.
We have people all over the world.
How do you pull that off?
I think it's a fascinating problem, first of all, and I'm not sure it's fully been solved by anybody. I think you have to be very authentic. Part of me talking to the people, the team, understanding what they do, traveling to every office in the world, which we've effectively done, is to understand how they view the culture. What is it they feel? What is it they perceive? I believe that culture, you've got to, again, be authentic with it, and that be honest about what you're really good at. If you're really good at customer engagement, or if you're really good at social and whatever those things are, be honest about that, and then give yourself one or two things that you aspire to. That's the way I like to approach that problem. I like to think about, hey, what defines Acumatica? Like, Acumatica is a very community-centric company. We are a big family with our partners and our customers, and we run these very community-centric events, and there's a lot of goodwill. And you really want to amplify and focus on that. But then you say, where can we be aspirational? Well, I want us to be a little bit more aspirational in our growth mindset, a little bit more aspirational in our urgency. And so you sort of give yourself a grounding in what's truly authentic, and then think about where you want to aspire. Now, culture also is very unique, region to region, country to country. So, when I visit our team in Canada, or I visit our team in Serbia, we have a big team in Serbia, like, they have their own definable culture. It's around the office, or it's around certain individuals. And I relish that. I actually think it's great to have regional differences. I think it's great to have people who are highly influential in the culture, and you want to understand who those people are, and you want to give them the tools to make the people there happy. And so I look at it very much country by country, and also function by function. Your sales organization is going to have a different cultural feel than, say, your engineering organization will. And I respect it and relish that. So I don't believe in a one-size-fits-all mentality. I believe very much that, again, what's authentic for the company, and there'll be uniqueness regionally, functionally, whatever it happens to be, based on people. And I think that that's also been very, very hard through the pandemic, through distributed workforce management. Our employees are about one half in an office and about one half remote. And even those that are in an office, we're coming in 2 or 3 days a week, and I think that's fine. And my belief is that I don't want people to do something that feels artificial. If it feels authentic and productive for them to work from home on a Monday and a Tuesday, do it. And yet, how do you then make sure people feel like they're part of this bigger entity? One of the hardest problems we've had has been the hundreds of people we've hired during the pandemic, making them feel part of this culture. And so we have had to be a lot more planful with company events, with company communications, with connecting with individuals who haven't been here very long, because they just don't know the history of this place. And I was one of those people. Like, I'm a recent starter here, so I can speak authentically from that experience. I think that's one of the hardest problems we face as companies right now, is how do you make sure people who recent starts or don't have this grounding in the past of this company feel like they're part of this bigger thing. And again, the only way to do that is to give them experiences and focus on what's authentic. And that's my philosophy in those moments.
John, you mentioned no one's quite figured it out, and it seems to me like a role of a future fit CEO these days is to figure stuff out that hasn't yet happened. AI and, oh my God, like what are the real world applications for our business for this thing, and and culture and so on and so forth. So there's a saying like, don't let your schooling get in the way of your education. How do you continually educate yourself or re-educate yourself or inform yourself or stay on top of all the information as these markets move, Serbia, Russia, UK, Asia, you got Canada, you've got all these different regions that you're, trying to make strategic decisions around. How do you stay abreast of all this information and educate yourself so that you can make effective decisions?
I mean, you have to be in listening mode all the time. You have to be very planful about being in listening mode. I have to, when I travel, I'd be very explicit about wanting to hit each of these locations and certain frequencies. When I connect with the team, I want to be very planful about connecting with them and not just giving them my message. Like a lot of folks, a lot of bosses you work for over time, they want to go give their speech everywhere they go. I much more prefer the listening mode. I much prefer the town hall. I much more prefer understanding what people are feeling. And, I try to be one of these individuals that people feel comfortable talking to. And as a result, again, I want to learn those things all the time. So I have to make myself open up that time. I have to do these customer tours once a quarter. I want to go see all my team as much as possible. I want to see them when we all gather, for example, at our big user summit in January. for the first time, we gathered everybody that was there into a room, and we had a great discussion with hundreds of people about what was going on at the company. That was a moment that hadn't happened before. So these kinds of moments where you say, how do I make sure that I'm not just projecting my thoughts, but I'm in listening mode and learning, very intentionally learning about the current status, because they're much more connected to it than I am. I know what I hear about the market from time to time, and unless I go specifically and intently ask, what's happening right now in Belgrade, Serbia? How are you feeling? What's going on with the market? How are Americans perceived? How are Russians perceived? Like, I don't know that without going there and being very thoughtful and planful about it. And so I think that one of the things I've learned over the years is that if you don't carve out that time, as kind of like what I said before, if you don't carve out that kind of time for yourself, you'll quickly get outdated. You'll quickly no longer be connected. And the same is true for the platform and the technology. If I'm not making sure that I'm hearing about the latest developments and what the team is doing or what they want to do and why that is, and what technology they're benefiting from, otherwise I can just be an appendage to that team. Now, I'm not an engineer, so I'm not going to tell them to go write container technology or use ChatGPT, whatever it is. But I want to hear why they want to do something, what the business implications are. And so, knowing my own lane on that's important. But if I don't make myself go into listening mode on those kinds of things, it's very easy, again, to just focus on the day-to-day, the contracts, the deals, whatever it is. You've got to go decide that you as a CEO need to open up your calendar for those kinds of moments, or you won't learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really good advice. Speaking of advice, if I could give you the keys to the Matt Brown Show time machine, and you could go back to yourself on day one, John, of this whole journey, and give yourself one piece of advice about scale and whatever else, leadership, what one piece of advice would you give yourself?
Let's put the geopolitical things aside, because that's not productive. But the one piece of advice to myself, I think, would be there's a bunch of things I tell myself. So I'm trying to pick the one that I would tell myself. I think the one I would tell myself first is to be very willing to take risks on the product and market. I think I inherited a company and a product that was fairly specific in its goals and what we were building. I would like to take more risks. I think that we probably spent not enough time taking risks on our product line over the last 12 months because we've been nervous about locations and people and finishing off features. I think we'll take more risks this year. I probably should have started that a year ago. And that's because I think those are the kinds of things where you say that will set us up for more growth 3 years down the line. And I think if I'd known some of the things I know now back then, I would have made faster decisions on some of those things.
Mm-hmm. And last question for you, John, and then we'll wrap up. What's your advice to another founder, another CEO that's listening to you speak and going, damn, I want a piece of that sunshine? What advice would you like to give other entrepreneurs, other CEOs right now listening to your success story and wanting a piece of that action themselves?
Well, let's separate the business stuff from the personal stuff. I actually think on the personal stuff, it's actually a very easy answer. Like being a CEO is a very lonely job. Find the right mentors, find the right colleagues and peers. You learn so much from those people. And I think that if you're a first-time founder or a first-time CEO and you're going through these challenges and trying to figure out how to scale and grow your company, be very, very willing to network to people who can relate to your experience. I just think that mentorship and peer connections are so valuable for people. I know most of the other major CEOs of similar sized companies and software in the sale area. I talk to them all the time. We learn from each other. It's incredibly valuable. And anytime I get a reach out from a CEO who wants to talk about their business problems, I'm happy to do that because it's the way I learned. So I think on the personal side, it's the first thing I would say is don't do this by yourself. It's a lonely role. You've got to have the right mentorship and peers around you. Okay. Then the second thing I'd say, let's go to the business side. I think the classic mistake I see for founders especially, and I'm a very active angel investor, so I get involved with lots and lots of very small companies, and I'm on a few other boards of companies that I've invested in, things like that. The classic example I see is an over-focus on the product and an under-focus on the go-to-market motion and how people think about reaching critical mass at scale with their product. And it's like, the classic engineer-led, build it and people will find it work only works in certain very unique instances. Beyond that, I think that people got to be much more focused on what the customer message is, how to reach those customers, what the right model is for going to market well before most companies think about it. Because that's the thing that almost always plateaus. You might sign the first 10 or 20 or 50 great customers to your cool new technology, but then you realize you have no way of scaling to the next 100 or the next 1,000. And I think that companies that are much more aggressive think about their go-to-market motion early, set themselves up better for a much smoother growth curve, as opposed to raise some money, plateau, raise some money, plateau. And that can be very blocky, and it doesn't work very well right now. I mean, that's why some of the capital markets are tied up for startups. And I think that's, to me, the best companies have solved some of those problems early, and they keep trying. If it doesn't work the first way, try another way, try another way, try another way. The best companies that I know have gone through many, many, many trials and errors on go-to-market, while their product in some ways has been fairly stable. And of course, they're adding to it all the time, but it's that go-to-market motion that I think doesn't get enough attention and credit.
John, power episode. Thanks, man. Thank you for being here and sharing your obviously incredibly valuable insights and perspective. Thank you for being on the Secrets of Scale series. It's been a real privilege having you here.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Cheers, everybody.
Sure.